The words cut through me like ice. Mom, you're being ridiculous. Cancel that appointment. We can't afford another one of your hypochondriac episodes. My daughter Sarah stood in the marble lobby of the Riverside Medical Center, her voice echoing off the pristine walls as other patients turned to stare. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, being lectured about medical expenses in the very building that bore my signature on every deed, every contract, every major decision for the past 15 years. But Sarah didn't know that. None of them did. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Catherine Whitmore, though most people just call me Ellie. At 72, I've learned that being underestimated is both a curse and a gift. That Tuesday morning in October, as I sat in the plush waiting area of what everyone assumed was just another medical center, I felt the familiar sting of invisibility that had followed me for decades. Sarah paced in front of me, her designer, heels clicking against the imported Italian marble I had personally selected during the renovation 3 years ago. Her auburn hair was pulled back in the same severe bun she'd worn since becoming a corporate lawyer, and her navy suit looked expensive enough to fund a small medical procedure. She had always been beautiful, my Sarah, but somewhere along the way, success had hardened her features into something I barely recognized. Do you have any idea how much these specialists charge? She continued, her voice rising just enough to make the elderly gentleman reading a magazine glance over his glasses at us. Dr. Martinez is probably going to run a dozen unnecessary tests, and for what? Because you think you felt dizzy last week? I adjusted my simple gray cardigan and smoothed my silver hair, a habit I'd developed whenever I felt small. The truth was, I hadn't felt dizzy at all. The appointment was routine monitoring for a heart condition I'd been managing for years, something Dr. Martinez and I had discussed extensively. But explaining that to Sarah would require admitting I'd been seeing specialists regularly, which would lead to questions about insurance, costs, and ultimately money I supposedly didn't have. The receptionist, a young woman named Amanda whom I'd personally hired 2 years ago, glanced up from her computer screen. Her eyes met mine briefly, and I saw the flicker of recognition before she quickly looked away. Amanda knew exactly who I was, but she also understood the importance of discretion. It was one of the qualities that had impressed me during her interview. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Amanda called softly. "Dr. Martinez will see you now." Sarah whirled around. "Actually, we're canceling. My mother has decided this appointment isn't necessary. After all." She grabbed my arm with more force than affection. "Haven't you, Mom?" The waiting room had grown quiet. A mother with twin toddlers pretended to focus on her phone while clearly listening. An older man in a wool coat lowered his newspaper entirely. Even the background music seemed to fade as all attention focused on our little drama. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw a stranger wearing my child's face. When had she become so cold? When had money become more important than my health? I thought about the little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, who once wrote me a card saying I was the best mommy in the whole world. That child seemed like a different person entirely. "Sarah, dear," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning in my chest, "I really do need to see Dr. Martinez." Her grip on my arm tightened. "No, you don't. You're 72 years old, Mom. At some point, you have to accept that every ache and pain isn't a medical emergency. These doctors just want to milk elderly patients for every penny they have." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Several people in the waiting room shifted uncomfortably. Amanda's fingers hovered over her keyboard, clearly torn between professional protocol and personal discomfort. I could see Dr. Martinez's nurse, Patricia, standing in the doorway to the back offices, her face a mask of professional neutrality that barely concealed her surprise. What Sarah didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had built this place from the ground up. Not just financially, though that was true enough, but with my own hands, my own vision, my own relentless determination to create something meaningful. The Riverside Medical Center wasn't just another healthcare facility to me. It was my legacy, my life's work, and the culmination of dreams I'd nurtured since I was younger than Sarah was now. But sitting there in that chair, being publicly humiliated by my own daughter, I felt every one of my 72 years. I felt the weight of every sacrifice I'd made, every secret I'd kept, every moment I'd chosen to remain invisible rather than claim credit for what I'd accomplished. The woman who had transformed a bankrupt clinic into a state-of-the-art medical facility was being treated like a burden, a financial liability, a hypochondriac seeking attention. "Mrs. Whitmore," Amanda said again, her voice careful and professional. "Should I reschedule your appointment?" Sarah answered before I could speak. "Yes, please cancel it entirely, and any future appointments. My mother needs to learn to manage her anxiety without running to doctors every time she feels stressed." I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the familiar sensation of disappearing. It was a feeling I'd known since childhood, when my own mother used to dismiss my concerns, my dreams, my voice. I'd spent decades building something from nothing, proving my worth to a world that consistently undervalued women, especially older women. And yet here I was, being diminished by the very person I'd worked so hard to provide for. The irony was exquisite in its cruelty. Sarah lived in a beautiful home that I'd helped finance through a trust she knew nothing about. Her law school tuition had been paid by profits from the medical center's early success. Her children, my grandchildren, attended private schools, funded by the same institution she was now insulting. Everything she had achieved, every opportunity she'd been given, could be traced back to the building we were sitting in and the vision that had created it. But she saw only an old woman being dramatic, an inconvenience, a source of unnecessary expense. I opened my eyes and looked around the waiting room one more time. The artwork on the walls had been chosen carefully to create a calming atmosphere. The furniture was arranged to provide both privacy and community. The lighting was designed to be neither harsh nor dim, but welcoming. Every detail had been considered, planned, and implemented with the patient experience in mind. This wasn't just a business to me. It was a sanctuary, a place where people came when they were vulnerable, scared, and in need of care. "Very well," I said finally, standing up with as much dignity as I could muster. "I suppose the appointment can wait." Sarah's expression softened slightly, perhaps recognizing that she'd pushed too hard. "Mom, I'm not trying to be mean. I just think you worry too much about your health. You're stronger than you think." Stronger than I think. If only she knew how strong I'd had to be. If only she understood the battles I'd fought, the obstacles I'd overcome, the empire I'd built while she was growing up, thinking her mother was just another housewife with too much time on her hands. As we walked toward the exit, I caught Amanda's eye one more time. She gave me the slightest nod, a gesture so small that Sarah couldn't possibly have noticed it. But I understood. Amanda was telling me she'd handle the appointment quietly, that Dr. Martinez would understand, that this humiliation wouldn't define me or change anything about who I really was. But walking out of that building, my building, while being lectured about financial responsibility by my own daughter, something inside me began to shift. Not anger, exactly, though that was certainly part of it. Something deeper, more fundamental. A recognition that the time for invisibility was ending, whether I was ready for it or not. Sarah drove me home to my modest apartment in silence, probably assuming she'd handled a difficult situation with appropriate firmness. She helped me to my door with the kind of dutiful care that felt more like obligation than love, kissed my cheek with lips that barely made contact, and promised to call. Later in the week, standing in my doorway, watching her drive away in her luxury sedan, I realized something profound. I had spent so many years protecting others from the truth of who I was that I'd forgotten to protect myself. I'd become so comfortable being underestimated that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen. But that was about to change. The next morning, I would return to the Riverside Medical Center. Not as Eleanor Whitmore, the old woman with too many concerns about her health. Not as the mother being managed and dismissed by her successful daughter. I would return as Dr. Eleanor Catherine Whitmore, founder and owner of the most respected medical facility in 3 counties, the woman who had built something extraordinary while everyone around her assumed she was ordinary. The confrontation in the waiting room had been a catalyst, a moment of such profound disrespect that it had awakened something in me I thought I'd buried years ago. My daughter wanted to lecture me about unnecessary medical expenses, about the cost of caring for my health in my own facility. Tomorrow, she would learn exactly how unnecessary those concerns really were. And everyone who had witnessed my humiliation would understand that sometimes the most powerful people are the ones you never see coming. The rain drummed against the windows of my small apartment as I sat in my favorite armchair, a cup of chamomile, tea growing cold in my hands. The events at the medical center played on repeat in my mind, each memory sharper than the last. But as painful as Sarah's words had been, they had awakened something I'd kept buried for far too long. The story of how I became the woman behind the Riverside Medical Center, and why I'd chosen to hide that truth for so many years. It all began 47 years ago, when I was 25 and married to Robert Whitmore, a charming man with big dreams and an even bigger appetite for failure. We lived in a cramped apartment above Peterson's Bakery on the wrong side of town, where the smell of rising dough mixed with the constant worry about unpaid bills. Robert sold insurance, or at least he tried to. Most days he came home with stories about almost sales and potential clients who just needed a little more time to think things over. I worked as a secretary at Riverside General Hospital, the old facility that would eventually become the foundation of everything I built. It was a different world then, when women like me were expected to type letters, answer phones, and smile prettily while the men made all the important decisions. But I was watching, always watching, learning how the hospital operated, where the inefficiencies lay, and most importantly, where the opportunities were hiding. Dr. Harold Fleming was the chief administrator then, a pompous man who treated the hospital like his personal kingdom and the staff like his subjects. He had a habit of dictating memos while pacing behind his desk, never bothering to look at me as I transcribed his words. To him, I was furniture, as essential and invisible as his filing cabinet. That invisibility became my greatest asset. During those long afternoons in Dr. Fleming's office, I learned about budgets, insurance reimbursements, supply chain management, and the delicate dance between providing quality care and maintaining financial stability. I discovered that the hospital was hemorrhaging money, not because of poor medical outcomes, but because of wasteful management and outdated systems. Equipment sat unused while other departments desperately needed resources. Pharmaceutical contracts were renewed without competitive bidding. The cafeteria threw away more food than it served to patients. Most shocking of all, I learned that Dr. Fleming was embezzling funds, skimming money from a charitable foundation that was supposed to provide free care to low-income patients. He would dictate invoices for services that were never provided, medical supplies that were never delivered, and consulting fees for experts who never consulted. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I kept meticulous records of everything, partly because it was my job, but mostly because something deep inside me knew this information would be important someday. At home, Robert would complain about his failed sales calls while I cooked dinner, and listen to his plans for the next get-rich-quick scheme. He talked about real estate ventures and business partnerships that required investments we didn't have. Meanwhile, I was quietly attending night classes at the community college, studying business administration and healthcare management. When Robert asked about my evening absences, I told him I was visiting my sister Margaret, who lived across town. He never questioned it, never showed enough interest in my life to verify the story. The turning point came during my 3rd year at the hospital. Dr. Fleming had taken an extended vacation to Florida, leaving the day-to-day operations to his assistant administrator, a nervous man named Gerald who spent most of his time hiding in his office. In Fleming's absence, I essentially ran the administrative side of the hospital. I scheduled meetings, reviewed contracts, and handled correspondence with suppliers and insurance companies. That's when I discovered the full extent of the hospital's financial crisis. We were 6 months away from bankruptcy. The board of directors, a group of local businessmen who met once a quarter to rubber stamp Fleming's decisions, had no idea how dire the situation had become. Medical staff were threatening to leave for better opportunities. Equipment failures were becoming more frequent. Patient satisfaction scores were plummeting. Something inside me shifted during those weeks. Maybe it was the desperation in the nurses' voices when they begged for basic supplies. Maybe it was watching elderly patients leave without proper treatment because they couldn't afford the co-payments. Or maybe it was simply the realization that I could do better, that I understood this place in ways that the supposed experts never would. I began developing a plan, not just to save the hospital, but to transform it into something extraordinary. I spent my evenings drafting proposals for operational improvements, researching grant opportunities, and studying successful medical facilities across the country. I created detailed budgets that would eliminate waste while improving patient care. I designed staffing models that would boost morale and retention. Most importantly, I developed a vision for what healthcare could look like when it was managed with both compassion and intelligence. When Dr. Fleming returned from Florida, tanned and oblivious, I was ready. I had compiled evidence of his embezzlement in a comprehensive file that included photocopied documents, financial records, and witness statements from suppliers who had been asked to participate in fraudulent schemes. I also had a complete business plan for saving the hospital, though I had no intention of sharing that with him. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday morning in early spring. I walked into Fleming's office carrying my evidence file and a letter of resignation. He was reading a golf magazine with his feet propped up on his desk, completely unaware that his carefully constructed house of cards was about to collapse. "Dr. Fleming," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I need to discuss some irregularities I've discovered in the hospital's financial records." He glanced up with the irritated expression of a man being interrupted during important leisure time. "What kind of irregularities, Eleanor? And couldn't this wait until after lunch?" I placed the file on his desk and opened it to the first page of documentation. The kind that could result in federal charges for embezzlement, insurance, fraud, and misappropriation of charitable funds. The color drained from his face as he looked at the evidence I'd meticulously gathered. Bank records showing the diversion of foundation money into his personal accounts, invoices for phantom medical supplies, consultant agreements with companies that existed only on paper. 3 years' worth of documentation that painted a clear picture of systematic theft. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered, but his hands were shaking as he turned the pages. "You're a secretary, Eleanor. You don't understand complex financial arrangements." "I understand enough to know that the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit would find this very interesting," I replied calmly. "I also understand that the hospital board would be quite upset to learn how their trust has been violated." Fleming stood up abruptly, knocking over his coffee cup. The dark liquid spread across his desk, staining some of the documents I'd presented. "What do you want? Money? Is this some kind of blackmail scheme?" "I want you to resign immediately and turn over all financial records to an independent auditor," I said. "I want you to establish a fund to repay every penny you've stolen, and I want you to recommend me as interim administrator while the board searches for a permanent replacement." He laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the office walls. "You? You're dreaming, Eleanor. No one's going to put a secretary in charge of a hospital." "Then I suppose we'll let the authorities sort this out," I said, reaching for the file. His laughter died immediately. Wait. Just wait a minute. Let's think about this rationally. The negotiation took 3 hours. By the end of it, Fleming had agreed to my terms. He would resign for health reasons. The stolen money would be repaid through the sale of his assets, and he would recommend me for the interim position. In exchange, I would delay turning over the evidence to law enforcement until the financial remediation was complete. The hospital board was skeptical, to put it mildly. When Fleming presented his resignation and suggested that his secretary should temporarily fill his role, the reaction ranged from surprise to outright dismay. Board chairman William Ashford, who owned 3 furniture stores and considered himself an expert on business management, actually laughed out loud. "Harold, I know you've been under stress, but surely you're not serious about putting a secretary in charge of a major medical facility." That's when I stood up from my chair in the corner of the boardroom, where I'd been taking minutes as usual, and addressed the board directly. "Gentlemen, I've prepared a presentation that I think might change your perspective." For the next 90 minutes, I laid out my comprehensive plan for saving Riverside General. I presented financial projections, operational improvements, and strategic initiatives that would not only prevent bankruptcy, but position the hospital for long-term growth. I detailed exactly how much money Fleming's mismanagement had cost them, and how quickly we could recover if my recommendations were implemented. The room was silent when I finished. These men, who were accustomed to being the smartest people in any room, had just been schooled by a woman they'd barely noticed for 3 years. Board member Thomas Chen, who ran a successful construction company, was the first to speak. "Mrs. Whitmore, where did you learn so much about hospital administration?" "I've been watching, listening, and learning for 3 years," I replied. "I've also been taking courses in healthcare management and business administration. Most importantly, I've been paying attention to details that others have overlooked." The vote was unanimous. I was appointed interim administrator with a 6-month mandate to prove myself. What they expected was a caretaker who would keep the doors open while they found a real administrator. What they got was a revolution. Within 2 months, I had renegotiated supplier contracts, implemented new inventory management systems, and restructured the nursing staff to improve both efficiency and job satisfaction. Patient complaints dropped by 60%. Employee turnover virtually stopped. Most importantly, we were operating in the black for the first time in years. But success came with a price. Robert, who had initially been proud of my promotion, began to resent the long hours and the attention I was receiving. He felt diminished by my success, especially when people in town started referring to him as Eleanor's husband instead of the other way around. Our marriage, which had never been particularly strong, began to deteriorate rapidly. The final blow came when the board offered to make my position permanent. I accepted immediately, but when I came home to share the good news, Robert was waiting, with divorce papers. He couldn't handle being married to a woman who had surpassed him professionally, who earned more money, who commanded more respect in the community. "This isn't the woman I married," he said as he packed his belongings. "I married a secretary, not some hospital executive." "I'm the same person I've always been," I replied, though I knew that wasn't entirely true. Success had changed me, given me confidence and ambition I'd never allowed myself to acknowledge before. "No, you're not. You've become someone I don't recognize, someone who thinks she's better than everyone else." He left that night and never looked back. The divorce was finalized 6 months later, with Robert taking half of our minimal assets and leaving me with full custody of Sarah, who was just 3 years old at the time. I was 30 years old, recently divorced, raising a young daughter, and running a struggling hospital. Most people expected me to fail spectacularly. Instead, I thrived. With Robert's negativity and resentment out of my life, I was free to pursue my vision without apology or compromise. I threw myself into the work of transformation, arriving at the hospital before dawn and staying long after the last shift change. Sarah came with me many evenings, playing quietly in my office while I reviewed budgets and planned improvements. Those early years were exhausting but exhilarating. Every challenge overcome, every goal achieved, felt like a personal victory, not just for me, but for every woman who had been told she wasn't smart enough, strong enough, or qualified enough to lead. I was proving something to myself and to the world, though I was too focused on the work to fully realize the significance of what I was accomplishing. The transformation of Riverside General took 5 years. By then, we were the most respected medical facility in the region, known for excellent patient care, innovative treatments, and efficient operations. Medical professionals from other hospitals came to study our methods. Healthcare administrators requested tours to understand our success. The board, which had reluctantly given me a chance, now treated me with genuine respect and admiration. It was during this period that I met Dr. James Martinez, a young cardiologist who had just completed his residency. He was brilliant, compassionate, and utterly dedicated to patient care. More importantly, he never questioned my authority or treated me differently because I was a woman. He became not just a valued member of our medical staff, but a trusted friend and advisor. James was the one who suggested that we needed to think bigger, to expand beyond the limitations of our current facility. The old Riverside General building was showing its age, and our success had outgrown the physical space. We needed something completely new, something that would represent our commitment to excellence and innovation. That's when I began planning what would eventually become the Riverside Medical Center. Not just a hospital, but a comprehensive healthcare campus that would serve the community for generations to come. It was an ambitious vision that would require significant investment, political navigation, and careful planning. It was also the project that would establish my legacy and secure my family's financial future. But as my professional life soared to new heights, my personal life remained complicated. Sarah was growing up proud of her successful mother, but also resentful of the time and attention that success demanded. She complained that I cared more about the hospital than about her, that other mothers were available for school events and afternoon activities while I was always working. I tried to balance my responsibilities, but the truth was that building something extraordinary required extraordinary commitment. I missed some school plays and soccer games, but I was also creating something that would benefit thousands of people and provide financial security for my daughter's future. It was a trade-off that seemed necessary at the time, though I sometimes wondered if Sarah would ever understand the sacrifices I was making for both of us. As Sarah entered her teenage years, our relationship became increasingly strained. She began referring to the hospital as Mom's other family and complained that I loved my patients more than I loved her. When I tried to explain the importance of the work we were doing, she would roll her eyes and accuse me of caring more about strangers than about my own daughter. The irony was painful. Everything I was building was ultimately for her, to ensure that she would never have to worry about financial security, never have to depend on a man for her livelihood, never have to feel powerless in the way I had felt during my early marriage. But she saw only the long hours and divided attention, not the future I was securing for both of us. During her senior year of high school, Sarah announced that she wanted to study law, partly because she wanted a career that would command respect, and partly because she wanted to prove she could be successful without following in my footsteps. I supported her decision completely, though I secretly hoped that someday she might join me in healthcare administration. When Sarah left for college, I experienced a profound sense of loss mixed with relief. I missed her terribly, but I also felt free to pursue my vision without the constant tension of trying to balance work and motherhood. It was during this period that I made the decision to transition from running an existing hospital to building something entirely new. The Riverside Medical Center project consumed the next 5 years of my life. I worked with architects to design a facility that would be both beautiful and functional. I negotiated with contractors, suppliers, and regulatory agencies. I secured financing through a combination of municipal bonds, private investment, and my own substantial contribution. Most challenging of all, I navigated the political landscape, convincing city council members and community leaders that this investment would benefit everyone. Throughout the construction process, I maintained my position as administrator of the old Riverside General while simultaneously overseeing every detail of the new facility's development. It was exhausting work that required skills I'd never formally learned but somehow possessed. I discovered I had an intuitive understanding of construction timelines, design principles, and project management that surprised even me. When the Riverside Medical Center finally opened its doors, it was everything I had envisioned and more. State-of-the-art medical equipment, comfortable patient rooms, efficient workflows, and beautiful common areas that promoted healing and hope. The grand opening was attended by the governor, 3 congressmen, and medical professionals from across the state. Local newspapers called it a triumph of vision and determination. But as I stood in the main lobby that first day, watching patients and families experience the facility for the first time, my greatest sense of pride came not from the recognition or accolades. It came from knowing that I had created something that would make a difference in people's lives for decades to come. Every room, every system, every detail had been planned with the goal of providing the best possible care to anyone who walked through our doors. Sarah attended the opening ceremony, though she seemed more interested in networking with the political figures in attendance than in celebrating her mother's achievement. By then, she was in law school and already showing signs of the ambition and determination that would make her successful in her own right. She congratulated me politely, but there was a distance in her manner that suggested she still didn't fully understand or appreciate what I had accomplished. That distance only grew as the years passed. Sarah graduated from law school, joined a prestigious firm, married a successful architect named David, and had 2 children. She built a life that was comfortable, secure, and completely separate from mine. Our conversations became increasingly superficial, focusing on the children's activities and social pleasantries while avoiding any deeper discussion of our relationship or our shared history. I continued to run the medical center with the same passion and attention to detail that had made it successful, but I began to feel increasingly invisible in my own daughter's life. She would visit dutifully on holidays and birthdays, but there was little warmth or genuine connection between us. When she talked about her work or her family, it was with the assumption that I wouldn't really understand the complexities of her sophisticated life. The worst part was watching her interact with my grandchildren, 8-year-old Emma and 10-year-old Michael. She was warm, engaged, and completely present with them in ways she had never been with me during their ages. When they asked about Grandma Ellie's work, Sarah would dismiss it with vague references to helping sick people, without ever mentioning the scope or significance of what I had built. As I moved into my 60s and then 70s, I began to consider retirement and succession planning. The medical center was thriving under my leadership, but I knew that eventually someone else would need to take over. I had hoped that Sarah might develop an interest in healthcare administration, or at least in the business aspects of running a major medical facility. Instead, she seemed to view my work as something quaint and outdated, a relic from a time when women had fewer career options. The decision to step back from day-to-day operations was gradual rather than sudden. I promoted trusted colleagues to handle more responsibilities while maintaining my role as owner and final decision-maker. I established trusts and foundations to ensure the center's continued success while providing financial security for my family. Most importantly, I began documenting the history and vision of the institution I had built, hoping that someday someone would understand the full story of what had been accomplished. But I never told Sarah the complete truth about my role or my ownership of the medical center. Partly this was because she had never shown genuine interest in my work. Mostly, it was because I had become accustomed to being underestimated, to operating from the shadows while others received credit for visible achievements. I had built my career on being the power behind the throne, the woman who made things happen without requiring recognition. Now, sitting in my modest apartment after being humiliated in my own medical center, I realized that my choice to remain invisible had come at a tremendous cost. My own daughter saw me as a burden, a hypochondriac, a financial liability. She had no idea that the building where she had lectured me about unnecessary expenses belonged to me, that every improvement, every innovation, every success could be traced back to my vision and determination. Tomorrow, that would change. Tomorrow, I would stop hiding behind modesty and invisibility. Tomorrow, Sarah would learn exactly who her mother really was and what I had accomplished while she wasn't paying attention. The confrontation in the waiting room had been a catalyst, but the real story was just beginning. The weeks following my canceled appointment at the medical center brought a series of small humiliations that felt like death by 1,000 cuts. Each incident, insignificant on its own, added to a growing weight that pressed against my chest until breathing became a conscious effort. It was as if the universe had decided to test exactly how much invisibility one person could endure before something fundamental broke. It started with the grocery store. I was standing in the checkout line at Morrison's Market, the same store where I'd shopped for over 20 years, when I realized I'd forgotten my wallet. The teenage cashier, a girl with purple streaks in her hair and multiple ear piercings, looked at me with barely concealed irritation as I searched through my purse. "Ma'am, there are people waiting," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone young people reserve for elderly customers who dare to inconvenience them. Behind me, a middle-aged man in a business suit sighed audibly and checked his watch. A woman with twin toddlers made a frustrated clicking sound with her tongue. I could feel their impatience like heat radiating from a fire, burning my cheeks with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," I murmured, my hands trembling as I continued searching. "I know I have it here somewhere." That's when I heard the voice that made my stomach clench with familiar dread. "Mom? What are you doing here?" I turned to see Sarah approaching from the pharmacy section, her arms full of vitamins and over-the-counter medications. She looked impeccable as always, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite the late hour. But her expression when she saw me fumbling through my purse was one of barely contained mortification. "Sarah, dear, I just can't seem to—" "Find my wallet," I began. But she had already stepped forward, pulling out her credit card with the efficient motion of someone solving an embarrassing problem. "I'll pay for this," she told the cashier, then turned to me with the kind of strained smile people use when they're trying to appear patient in public. "Mom, maybe you should start keeping your wallet in the same place every time. You know, establish a routine." The condescension in her voice was gentle but unmistakable. She was speaking to me the way she spoke to her children when they forgot their homework or left their toys scattered around the house. Behind us, I could hear someone whisper, "Poor thing, probably the beginning of dementia." As Sarah paid for my groceries, a modest collection of items that cost less than what she probably spent on a single lunch, I felt something crumble inside me. Not just my pride, though that was certainly wounded, but something deeper. The accumulation of being managed, dismissed, and treated like a burden was becoming unbearable. "There you go," Sarah said, handing me the receipt with the same forced cheerfulness she might use with a difficult client. "All taken care of." "Thank you, dear," I managed, though the words felt like sand in my mouth. She walked me to my car, a 15-year-old Honda Civic that had served me well but looked shabby next to the luxury vehicles in the parking lot. As I loaded my groceries into the trunk, Sarah stood beside me with her arms crossed, watching me with the concerned expression of someone monitoring a potentially dangerous situation. "Mom, have you thought about maybe doing online grocery shopping? A lot of seniors find it easier than dealing with crowds and checkout lines." Seniors. The word hit me like a slap. When had I become a senior in my daughter's eyes? When had I stopped being her mother and become a problem to be solved? I like shopping for myself, I said quietly. I enjoy seeing what's fresh, talking to the butcher about the best cuts of meat, choosing my own produce. Sarah's sigh was small, but audible. I know you do, but maybe it's time to think about what's practical rather than what you prefer. Practical. Another word that felt like a judgment, an indication that my preferences were no longer valid or important. I was being gently, but firmly, pushed toward a version of elderly life that involved accommodation, limitation, and gradual surrender of independence. The drive home was longer than usual, not because of traffic, but because I took the scenic route past the medical center. Even in the darkness, the building was beautiful, its windows glowing with warm light, the landscaping illuminated by carefully placed spotlights. I pulled into the parking lot and sat in my car for several minutes, looking at the structure I had envisioned, designed, and brought to life. From the outside, it looked like any other successful medical facility. Clean, modern, professional. But I knew every brick, every wire, every design decision that had gone into its creation. I knew which suppliers had provided the marble for the lobby, which contractor had installed the specialized air filtration system, which artist had created the calming murals in the pediatric wing. This building was as much a part of me as my own heartbeat, yet my own daughter saw me as someone who couldn't be trusted to manage a simple grocery transaction. The next incident happened at the bank. I had gone to make a routine deposit from one of my smaller investment accounts, the kind of transaction I'd been handling independently for decades. The young teller, a man who couldn't have been more than 25, looked at the check with confusion. "This is a pretty large amount, Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying an undertone of suspicion. "Are you sure this is correct?" The check was for $12,000, a quarterly dividend payment from a pharmaceutical stock I'd held for 15 years. It was actually smaller than usual, but apparently large enough to trigger concern about an elderly woman's financial competence. "Yes, it's correct," I replied calmly. "It's a dividend payment. I've been receiving them for years." He frowned at his computer screen, then looked back at me with the expression of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. "I'm going to need to verify this with my manager. Sometimes seniors can be targeted by scammers who create fake checks." Seniors again. And now the implication that I was vulnerable to fraud, too naive or cognitively impaired to recognize a legitimate financial document. I stood at the counter for 20 minutes while the teller and his manager examined my check, made phone calls, and spoke in hushed tones about proper procedures for elderly customers. When they finally processed the deposit, the manager approached me with a pamphlet about financial safety for seniors and a business card for the bank's estate planning services. "Mrs. Whitmore, we want to make sure you're protected. Have you considered setting up a trust or giving someone power of attorney to help you manage your finances?" The irony was so profound it almost made me laugh. Here I was, being offered basic financial advice by people who probably earned in a year what I made in investment returns in a month. They were treating me like a potential victim while I stood there as one of their most substantial depositors. "Thank you for your concern," I said, accepting the pamphlet with as much grace as I could muster. "I'll certainly consider your suggestions." But the damage was done. Another small chip in the foundation of my dignity. Another reminder that the world saw me as fragile, confused, and in need of protection from my own decisions. The incidents multiplied over the following weeks. At the pharmacy, the technician spoke slowly and loudly, as if age had affected my hearing rather than just adding lines to my face. At the post office, the clerk insisted on helping me fill out a simple form, explaining each line as if I'd never encountered paperwork before. Even at the library, where I'd been a regular patron for years, the librarian asked if I needed help using the computer catalog, then hovered anxiously as I navigated the system I'd been using successfully for decades. Each interaction left me feeling smaller, more invisible, more disconnected from the capable woman I knew myself to be. It was like watching my own erasure in real time, seeing the world's perception of me narrow down to a single dimension. Elderly, woman, probably confused, definitely in need of management. The breaking point came during a family dinner at Sarah's house. It was supposed to be a celebration of my granddaughter Emma's excellent report card, a simple Sunday meal that had become a monthly tradition. Sarah's home was beautiful, a showcase of tasteful furniture and carefully curated decor that spoke of success and sophisticated taste. Everything was perfect, from the fresh flowers on the dining room table to the classical music playing softly in the background. David, Sarah's husband, greeted me with his usual polite warmth, taking my coat and asking about my week with the kind of genuine interest that made me understand why Sarah had married him. He was a good man, successful in his own right as an architect, but without the sharp edges that sometimes made conversations with Sarah feel like negotiations. The children, Emma and Michael, hugged me enthusiastically and chattered about school, friends, and their various activities. Emma proudly showed me her report card, all A's except for a B+ in mathematics, which she explained with the serious tone of someone discussing a minor tragedy. "Grandma Ellie, I tried really hard on the math test, but word problems are super confusing," she said, her blue eyes wide with concern. "Word problems can be tricky," I agreed, settling into the living room chair that had become my designated spot. "The secret is to read them very carefully and figure out what question they're really asking." "Maybe you could help me practice sometime," Emma suggested hopefully. Before I could respond, Sarah emerged from the kitchen carrying a platter of appetizers. "Oh, Emma, Grandma Ellie is probably too busy for tutoring. Besides, we have that math program on the computer that's designed specifically for your grade level." The dismissal was casual but complete. My offer to help was deflected with the efficiency of someone redirecting a conversation away from an uncomfortable topic. Emma's face fell slightly, but she recovered quickly with the resilience children possess. Dinner itself was delicious, perfectly prepared and beautifully presented. Sarah had always been an excellent cook, a skill she'd developed despite my own limited abilities in the kitchen during her childhood. We talked about safe topics, the children's school activities, David's latest architectural project, Sarah's recent cases at the law firm. I listened and nodded, contributing when asked direct questions but mostly observing the easy dynamic between Sarah and her immediate family. It was during dessert that the conversation took the turn I'd been unconsciously dreading. "Mom, David and I have been talking," Sarah began, her tone carrying the careful weight of a prepared speech. "We're a little concerned about you living alone in that apartment." I set down my fork and looked at her, trying to read the expression on her face. She was using her lawyer voice, the one that presented facts and logical arguments while maintaining an appearance of caring concern. "What kind of concerns?" I asked quietly. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. The children continued eating their ice cream, either unaware of the tension or skilled at ignoring adult discussions that didn't directly concern them. "Well, there was the incident at the grocery store last week," Sarah continued. "And David mentioned that when he helped you with your taxes last month, you seemed confused about some of the forms." I turned to look at David, who had the grace to appear embarrassed. "I never said confused," he protested mildly. "I said you asked questions about some of the new tax law changes, which is perfectly normal." But Sarah was already moving forward with her argument. "The point is, you're 72 years old, and living alone isn't getting any safer. What if you fell and couldn't reach the phone? What if you forgot to turn off the stove? What if you had a medical emergency?" Each question felt like a small accusation, an indictment of my competence and independence. I could feel the children's attention shifting toward our conversation, their dessert forgotten as they sensed the tension in the room. "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself," I said, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. Of course you are right now, Sarah agreed with the patronizing tone of someone humoring a difficult child. But we need to think about the future. We need to plan for what happens when you're not as independent as you are today. And what exactly are you suggesting? Sarah exchanged a look with David, who seemed to be silently pleading for an escape from the conversation. There's a really nice assisted living facility about 20 minutes from here. Sunrise Manor. I drove by last week, and it looks lovely. They have activities, meals provided, medical staff on site. You'd have your own apartment, but with support when you need it. Assisted living. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire, acrid and suffocating. She was suggesting that I abandon my independence, my home, my autonomy, and move into institutional care because she was worried about hypothetical future problems. Sarah, I have no intention of moving into assisted living, I said firmly. I'm healthy, independent, and perfectly capable of managing my own life. Mom, please don't be stubborn about this. We're just thinking about what's best for everyone. What's best for everyone, or what's most convenient for you? The question came out sharper than I'd intended, cutting through the polite veneer of family concern. Sarah's face flushed, and David looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. That's not fair, Sarah said, her voice rising slightly. We're trying to be responsible. We're trying to make sure you're safe and cared for. I don't need to be cared for, I replied, my own voice growing stronger. I need to be respected. I need to be treated like an adult who can make her own decisions, not like a problem that needs to be solved. Emma looked up from her ice cream with worried eyes. Why is everyone upset? She asked in a small voice. The question broke the tension momentarily, reminding us all that we were having this argument in front of children who didn't understand the complex dynamics of aging, independence, and family responsibility. We're just having a grown-up discussion, sweetheart, David said gently. Sometimes adults need to talk about important things, and sometimes we don't agree. But the damage was done. The conversation limped along for another few minutes before I made my excuses and left early, claiming, fatigue though, I felt more energized by anger than tired by the evening. As I drove home through the quiet streets, I replayed the conversation in my mind, hearing not just Sarah's words but the assumptions behind them. She saw me as a liability, a responsibility, a problem that needed to be managed before it became unmanageable. She had no idea that the woman she was trying to place in assisted living was the same woman who had built and operated one of the most successful medical facilities in the state. The irony was devastating. While she worried about my ability to manage basic daily tasks, I was overseeing the operations of a complex healthcare system that employed over 800 people and served thousands of patients annually. While she fretted about my financial security, I was managing investment portfolios and trust funds that would ensure her children's college educations and her own comfortable retirement. Back in my apartment, I sat in my favorite chair and looked around at the modest space I'd called home for the past 5 years. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. The furniture reflected my taste. The books on the shelves represented my interests. The art on the walls included several pieces I'd painted myself during quiet weekends. This wasn't the home of someone who needed assisted living. This was the home of someone who had chosen simplicity over ostentation, who valued independence over impression. But I realized that my choices had contributed to the problem. By living modestly, by driving an older car, by shopping at regular grocery stores instead of upscale markets, I had reinforced the image of someone with limited means and diminished capacity. My deliberate invisibility, my choice to remain in the background while others received credit for my achievements, had created a perception that was now being used to justify taking away my independence. The phone rang, interrupting my brooding. It was Dr. Martinez's office, calling to reschedule the appointment Sarah had forced me to cancel. Mrs. Whitmore, this is Patricia from Dr. Martinez's office. We wanted to follow up about your canceled appointment and see when you'd like to reschedule. Patricia's voice was warm and professional, the same tone she used with all patients. She had no idea she was speaking to the woman who had hired Dr. Martinez, who had approved the purchase of the equipment he used, who had designed the office space where he practiced. "Patricia, could you please schedule me for the earliest available appointment?" I asked. "And could you make sure Dr. Martinez knows that this visit is particularly important?" "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. Is Thursday at 10:30 convenient?" "Thursday at 10:30 will be perfect." After hanging up, I made another call, this one to my attorney, Margaret Chen, the daughter of the Thomas Chen who had served on the original hospital board. Margaret had been handling my legal affairs for the past decade, and she was one of the few people who understood the full scope of my financial holdings and business interests. "Margaret, it's Eleanor Whitmore. I need to schedule a meeting to discuss some changes to my estate planning and to review the governance structure of the medical center." "Of course, Eleanor. Is everything all right? You sound stressed." "Everything is fine, but I think it's time to make some adjustments to how certain information is shared with my family." Margaret was quiet for a moment, understanding the implications of my request. She had been present during several conversations about my desire to maintain privacy about my business holdings, and she knew the reasons behind my discretion. "When would you like to meet?" "As soon as possible. This week, if your schedule allows." "I can see you Wednesday afternoon at 3. Will that work?" "Perfect. Thank you, Margaret." The next few days passed in a haze of preparation and reflection. I spent hours reviewing documents, making lists, and thinking through the implications of what I was about to do. For nearly 2 decades, I had chosen invisibility over recognition, preferring to operate behind the scenes while others received public credit for achievements that were fundamentally mine. That choice had been motivated by several factors. Partly, it was a product of my generation and upbringing, when women were expected to be modest about their accomplishments. Partly, it was strategic, understanding that sometimes influence is more effective when it's wielded quietly. But mostly, it was protective, a way of shielding myself and my family from the scrutiny and expectations that came with public success. Now, however, that protective invisibility had become a prison. My own daughter saw me as incompetent and burdensome because she had no context for understanding who I really was or what I had accomplished. The community that had benefited from my vision and leadership had no idea that the quiet elderly woman they occasionally saw at the grocery store was the architect of their most important medical facility. The meeting with Margaret was productive and emotional. As we reviewed the documents that outlined my holdings and accomplishments, I felt a mixture of pride and sadness. Pride in what I had built. Sadness that I had hidden it so completely that even my own family remained ignorant of the truth. "Eleanor, you've built something extraordinary," Margaret said as we finished our review. "Why have you been so determined to keep it secret?" "Because I thought it was more important to do the work than to get credit for it," I replied. "Because I believed that if I did good work, that would be enough." "And now?" "Now I realize that sometimes silence is mistaken for incompetence. Sometimes invisibility becomes indistinguishable from irrelevance." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "So, what do you want to do?" "I want to stop hiding. I want my daughter to understand who her mother really is. And I want to make sure that if something does happen to me, my legacy is properly understood and protected." We spent the next 2 hours revising documents, updating beneficiary information, and preparing the materials that would eventually reveal the full truth about my role in building the Riverside Medical Center. It felt like preparing for a performance. I'd been rehearsing my entire life, but had never had the courage to give. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that seemed to match my mood as I prepared for my rescheduled appointment with Dr. Martinez. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that were professional but not ostentatious, elegant but not expensive looking. I wanted to look like the woman I truly was, not the elderly patient my daughter thought I was becoming. As I drove to the medical center, I felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. This wouldn't just be a routine medical appointment. This would be the beginning of a conversation that would change everything. The first step in reclaiming my identity and demanding the respect I had earned but never claimed. The building looked different to me that morning, not just as a place where I received medical care, but as a monument to vision, determination, and the quiet revolution of a woman who had refused to accept limitations others tried to impose on her. Today, I would stop being invisible. Today, I would stop apologizing for taking up space. Today, the real Eleanor Whitmore would finally step into the light. Thursday morning at 10:30, I walked through the main entrance of the Riverside Medical Center with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The marble floors gleamed under the soft lighting I had personally selected, and the gentle sound of the water fountain in the center of the lobby created exactly the calming atmosphere I had envisioned when designing this space. But today, I wasn't here as just another patient. Today, everything would change. Amanda looked up from the reception desk as I approached, her professional smile faltering slightly when she recognized me. She had been working here long enough to remember the uncomfortable scene with my daughter the week before, and I could see the concern in her eyes as she wondered if there might be a repeat performance. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore," she said carefully. "You're here for your 10:30 appointment with Dr. Martinez?" "Yes, but first I need you to make a phone call," I replied, my voice carrying an authority I hadn't used in this building for far too long. "Please contact Sarah Whitmore Patterson at Patterson, Myers & Associates and tell her that there's been an emergency with her mother at the medical center. Tell her she needs to come immediately." Amanda blinked in confusion. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you having a medical emergency? Should I call 911? "No emergency," I said calmly. "But I do need my daughter here. Please make the call and then ask Dr. Martinez if he can delay our appointment by 30 minutes. Tell him that Eleanor Whitmore needs to have a conversation with her family first." The use of my full name seemed to register something in Amanda's expression. She had heard that name in staff meetings, seen it on documents, but had never connected it to the quiet elderly woman who came for routine appointments. Her fingers hesitated over the phone as understanding began to dawn. "Mrs. Whitmore, should I notify anyone else that you're here?" "Not yet," I replied. "But please do make that call to my daughter. And Amanda? When she arrives, please escort her directly to Conference Room A. I'll be waiting there." Conference Room A was located on the administrative floor, accessible by a private elevator that most patients never used. It was where the medical center's board meetings were held, where major decisions were made, where the real business of running a healthcare facility took place. Amanda's eyes widened as she realized the significance of my request. "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. Right away." I took the elevator to the third floor, my heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The administrative wing was familiar territory, though I hadn't spent much time here in recent months. The hallways were lined with portraits of the medical center's leadership, including a formal photograph of myself that had been taken several years ago for a healthcare industry publication. I paused in front of it for a moment, studying the confident woman in the image who seemed like a stranger from another life. Conference Room A was exactly as I remembered it, with its long mahogany table, high-backed leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. The walls were decorated with awards and recognition certificates, including several that bore my name, though most visitors never bothered to read them carefully. I took my seat at the head of the table, the same chair I had occupied during countless board meetings, budget reviews, and strategic planning sessions. 25 minutes later, I heard voices in the hallway outside. Sarah's voice, sharp with worry and irritation, was asking questions that Amanda was diplomatically deflecting. The door opened, and my daughter burst in, her face flushed with anxiety and annoyance. "Mom, what's going on?" she demanded, not even pausing to take in her surroundings. Amanda said there was an emergency, but you look fine. Do you have any idea how worried I was? I left a client meeting to rush over here. She was still standing by the door, her briefcase clutched in her hand, her perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled from her hurried journey. It took her a moment to realize where we were, to notice the formal conference room, the executive surroundings, the portrait of her mother hanging on the wall behind the chair where I sat. "Please sit down, Sarah," I said quietly, gesturing to one of the chairs facing me across the table. She remained standing, her lawyer instincts sensing that something significant was happening, but not yet understanding what. Her eyes traveled around the room, taking in the awards, the certificates, the unmistakable trappings of corporate leadership. "Mom, why are we in a conference room? What's going on here?" "Sit down and I'll explain everything." Reluctantly, she moved to one of the chairs and perched on the edge, as if ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. Her expression was a mixture of concern, confusion, and barely controlled impatience. "Sarah, do you know where we are right now?" I asked. She glanced around again, her frown deepening. "We're in some kind of administrative office at the medical center." "Mom, if this is about your appointment, we can discuss it downstairs. You don't need to commandeer conference rooms to talk about your medical care." "This is conference room A," I continued, ignoring her attempt to minimize the situation. "It's where the medical center's board of directors meets. It's where the most important decisions about this facility are made. And it's where I've spent thousands of hours over the past 15 years. "What are you talking about?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline that had grown and changed so much since I first envisioned this building. When I spoke again, my voice was steady and clear. "Sarah, I need to tell you something that I should have told you years ago. Something I kept private because I thought it was more important to do the work than to take credit for it. Something I kept quiet because I believed that modest success was better than public recognition." She was staring at me now with the intense focus she usually reserved for complex legal cases. "Mom, you're scaring me. What are you trying to say?" I turned back to face her, standing beside the portrait that showed a younger version of myself, in professional attire, with the confidence of someone who had built something extraordinary. "I'm trying to tell you that your mother is not the helpless, financially struggling elderly woman you think she is. I'm trying to tell you that when you lectured me about unnecessary medical expenses last week, you were standing in a building that I own. When you worried about my ability to afford health care, you were talking to the woman who created this entire medical facility." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the air conditioning humming in the vents above us. Sarah's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, comprehension, and finally shock. "What do you mean you own this building?" "I mean exactly that. The Riverside Medical Center belongs to me. I conceived it, I planned it, I financed it, and I built it. Every room, every piece of equipment, every policy and procedure bears my influence. The woman you think needs assisted living is the same woman who has been running one of the most successful medical facilities in the state for the past 15 years. Sarah's briefcase slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a sharp crack. She gripped the arms of her chair as if the room were spinning. "That's impossible. You're a secretary. You've always been a secretary." "I was a secretary 47 years ago when I started working at the old Riverside General Hospital. But I wasn't content to remain a secretary. I learned, I studied, I grew, and I seized opportunities when they presented themselves. I became an administrator, then a leader, and eventually the owner of this entire operation. I moved to a cabinet along the wall and retrieved a folder I had placed there earlier, filled with documents that would prove everything I was saying. Financial statements, ownership records, board resolutions, and newspaper articles chronicling the medical center's development and success. "Sarah, your law school tuition was paid with profits from this medical center. The down payment on your house came from a trust fund I established with money I earned from building this place. Your children's private school tuition, your family vacations, even the car you drove here today, all of it was made possible by the work I've done in this building." She was looking through the documents now, her trained legal mind processing the information while her personal understanding of reality crumbled and reformed. Stock certificates, property deeds, corporate filings, all bearing her mother's name as owner, president, and chairman of the board. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Because I thought it was more important to do good work than to receive recognition for it. Because I was raised to believe that women should be modest about their achievements. Because I wanted you to love me for who I was as your mother, not for what I had accomplished professionally." "But I didn't love you," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I mean, I love you, but I didn't respect you. I thought you were. You thought I was weak, dependent, a burden." She nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I thought you needed taking care of. I thought you couldn't manage on your own. And because I never corrected that impression, because you think I was just another struggling elderly woman, you treated me accordingly." The door to the conference room opened, and Dr. Martinez entered, followed by Patricia and Amanda. I had asked them to join us once Sarah had time to absorb the initial revelation. "Mrs. Whitmore," Dr. Martinez said warmly, "Patricia told me you wanted to reschedule our appointment to have a family meeting first. I hope everything is all right." Sarah looked up at him with confusion. "Dr. Martinez, do you know my mother?" He smiled, the same warm expression he showed all his patients, but there was additional respect in his voice when he replied. Of course I know your mother, Sarah. Eleanor Whitmore hired me 15 years ago when I was a young cardiologist, looking for a position at a facility that truly cared about patient outcomes. She's been not just my patient, but my employer and one of my most valued colleagues. Employer? Dr. Martinez reports directly to me, I said simply, as do all the physicians, nurses, and staff in this facility. The medical center employs 843 people, serves over 50,000 patients annually, and operates with a budget of over $200 million. I've been responsible for all of it. Patricia stepped forward, her expression gentle but firm. Mrs. Whitmore, if I may, I've been working here for 12 years, and I've never seen anyone care more deeply about patient welfare and staff satisfaction than your mother. She knows the names of housekeeping staff, remembers the birthdays of nurses, and has personally approved every major improvement to patient care we've implemented. Amanda nodded in agreement. When I was hired 2 years ago, Mrs. Whitmore personally interviewed me. She said she wanted to make sure that every patient who walked through our doors would be treated with dignity and respect, starting with their very first interaction at the reception desk. Sarah was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. The incident last week when I made you cancel your appointment? You humiliated me in my own building, I said quietly. In front of my employees, in front of patients I've dedicated my career to serving. You lectured me about medical expenses while standing in a facility that I created specifically to provide excellent, affordable health care to our community. Oh, God, she whispered, covering her face with her hands. What have I done? Dr. Martinez cleared his throat gently. Sarah, if I may, your mother has been one of the most influential figures in healthcare administration in this region. She's received numerous awards, spoken at national conferences, and served as a mentor to countless healthcare professionals. The patient-centered care model we use here has been studied and replicated by medical facilities across the country. He moved to another wall where several framed articles and awards were displayed. Healthcare Executive of the Year 2018, Innovator in Patient Care 2020, Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Hospital Association, 2022. Your mother didn't just build a successful business, Sarah. She revolutionized how we think about healthcare delivery. Sarah stood up slowly, moving to examine the awards and articles more closely. In each photograph, in every mention of the Riverside Medical Center's leadership, there was her mother. Not as a background figure or a supporting player, but as the visionary leader who had made it all possible. The Riverside Foundation, she read aloud from one of the plaques, providing free medical care to underserved populations. Established by Eleanor C. Whitmore, 2019. Last year alone, the foundation provided over $3 million in free medical services, I said. Prenatal care for low-income mothers, cancer treatment for uninsured patients, mental health, services for veterans. Every dollar came from the profits of this medical center, from the success of something I built. Sarah turned back to me, her face pale with the magnitude of her misunderstanding. Mom, I don't know what to say. I've been so wrong about everything. You've been operating with incomplete information, I replied. That's my fault, not yours. I chose to keep my professional life separate from our family relationship. I chose invisibility over recognition. But that choice had consequences I didn't anticipate. What kind of consequences? The consequence of watching my own daughter lose respect for me because she had no context for understanding who I really was. The consequence of being treated like a burden when I had actually been providing the foundation for our family's security all along. Dr. Martinez stepped forward again. Eleanor, if I may ask, what made you decide to reveal this now? I looked at Sarah, who was still processing the complete transformation of everything she thought she knew about her mother. Because last week, my daughter suggested I should move into assisted living. She was worried about my ability to take care of myself, my financial security, my cognitive function. She was trying to solve a problem that didn't exist because she had no idea who I actually was. Assisted living, Patricia repeated, her voice carrying a note of disbelief. She didn't know, I continued. She didn't know that the woman she was trying to protect was the same woman who had been protecting her all along. She didn't know that the building where she worried about my medical expenses was actually providing the income that made her own lifestyle possible. Sarah sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the revelations. Mom, why didn't you just tell me? Why did you let me think you were struggling financially? Because I wanted you to succeed on your own merits, not because you were Eleanor Whitmore's daughter. Because I wanted our relationship to be about love, not about money or professional status. Because I thought that if I did my job well enough, if I built something meaningful enough, that would be sufficient. But it wasn't sufficient, was it? No, I admitted. It wasn't, because by hiding my achievements, I accidentally made myself invisible as a person. By being modest about my success, I became overlooked and underestimated, even by my own family. Amanda spoke up quietly. Mrs. Whitmore, if I may say, everyone who works here knows how much you care about this place and the people in it. You've never asked for recognition or praise. You've just quietly made sure that everything runs smoothly and that patients receive the best possible care. That's exactly the problem, Sarah said suddenly, her voice thick with emotion. You've been quietly taking care of everyone, including me, and I never even noticed. I took it all for granted. I assumed someone else was responsible for the good things in my life. Not someone else, I corrected gently. Your mother. The same woman you thought needed assistance with grocery shopping and bank transactions. The irony of the situation was settling over all of us. Here was one of the region's most successful healthcare executives being lectured about fiscal responsibility by her daughter while standing in the building that represented the culmination of her life's work. Dr. Martinez shook his head in amazement. Sarah, your mother's vision for patient-centered care has influenced medical facilities across the country. She's been invited to speak at Harvard Medical School, Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic. Healthcare administrators come here specifically to study the systems and protocols she's developed. I had no idea, Sarah whispered. The question now, I said, resuming my seat at the head of the conference table, is what we do with this information. How do we move forward from here? Sarah looked around the room one more time, taking in the full scope of what her mother had built and achieved. When she spoke, her voice was different, carrying a respect that had been absent for years. Mom, I owe you an apology that's bigger than anything I know how to express. I've been treating you like you were incapable when you've actually been more capable than I ever imagined. I've been worried about taking care of you when you've been taking care of all of us. Apologies are a starting point, I replied. But what I really want is a relationship based on who we actually are, not who we assumed each other to be. Can you forgive me? I stood up and moved around the table to where my daughter was sitting. For the first time in years, when I put my arms around her, she didn't feel distant or distracted. She felt like my child again, vulnerable and real, and finally seeing me clearly. Sarah, there's nothing to forgive, but there is something to rebuild. A relationship between two adult women who respect each other, who understand each other, and who no longer make assumptions about each other's capabilities or worth. As we embraced, I caught sight of the portrait on the wall, the image of the confident woman who had built all of this. For the first time in years, I felt like that woman again. Not just successful in hiding, but proud of what I had accomplished, and ready to claim my place in the story I had written. The revelation was complete, but it was only the beginning. Now came the harder work of rebuilding relationships, redefining roles, and learning to live authentically after years of chosen invisibility. But as I held my daughter in the conference room of the medical center I had built, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: the possibility of being both powerful and loved, both accomplished and accepted, both the woman who had built an empire and the mother who had raised a daughter. The transformation was just beginning. 6 months after that transformative afternoon in Conference Room A, I stood at the podium of the Riverside Medical Center's main auditorium, looking out at an audience of over 300 healthcare professionals, community leaders, and family members who had gathered for the annual Excellence in Healthcare Awards ceremony. The stage lights were warm against my face, and I could see Sarah in the front row, her eyes bright with pride as she held my granddaughter Emma's hand. This was not the same woman who had tried to cancel my doctor's appointment, nor was I the key. Same woman who had allowed herself to be diminished by others' assumptions. The months following our revelation had been a journey of rediscovery, reconciliation, and remarkable change. Not just for Sarah and me, but for our entire family dynamic, and my role within the medical center itself. The truth had a way of reshaping everything it touched, like light bending through a prism to reveal colors that had always been there, but remained invisible until the angle was just right. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's advanced sound system that I had personally approved during the building's design phase. 25 years ago, I stood in a different medical facility, one that was failing its patients, its staff, and its community. I was a secretary then, invisible to most, ignored by those in power. But I was watching, learning, and dreaming of something better. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. This was my first public speech as the acknowledged owner and founder of the Riverside Medical Center. For decades, I had preferred to work behind the scenes, letting others take credit for the innovations and improvements that stemmed from my vision. But silence, I had learned, could be mistaken for absence, and modesty could be confused with incompetence. Today, we celebrate not just the achievements of our medical center, but the power of persistence, the importance of vision, and the reality that leadership can come from the most unexpected places. We celebrate the truth that excellence is not about titles or recognition, but about dedication to something greater than ourselves. From the podium, I could see Dr. Martinez in the third row, beaming with the pride of someone who had been part of building something extraordinary. Beside him sat Patricia, Amanda, and dozens of other staff members whose lives had been touched by the culture we had created together. These were the people who had seen my commitment long before my family understood it, who had witnessed my leadership even when I chose not to claim credit for it. The past 6 months had brought profound changes to my relationship with Sarah. The initial shock and guilt she experienced after learning the truth about my role had gradually transformed into genuine respect and curiosity about the work I had done. She began asking thoughtful questions about healthcare administration, seeking my advice on complex business matters, and most importantly, really listening when I spoke about the challenges and rewards of building something meaningful. Our conversations became richer, deeper, more substantial than they had been in years. Instead of managing me, Sarah started learning from me. Instead of protecting me from imagined vulnerabilities, she began understanding the strength that had always been there. The shift was gradual but unmistakable, like watching a relationship that had been frozen in misunderstanding slowly thaw into something authentic and mutually respectful. David had been particularly gracious about his role in the misunderstandings of the past. During a family dinner 3 months after the revelation, he had pulled me aside with an expression of sincere regret. "Eleanor, I need to apologize for how I participated in the conversations about your capabilities and independence. I should have asked more questions instead of making assumptions. I should have recognized that someone who raised a daughter as successful as Sarah couldn't possibly be as helpless as we thought." His apology was unnecessary, but appreciated. David was a good man who had simply accepted his wife's assessment of her mother without looking more deeply. Now, he sought my advice on his architectural projects, particularly those involving healthcare facilities, and he treated me with the professional respect he would show any accomplished colleague. The children's reactions had been perhaps the most touching. When Emma learned that her grandma Ellie was actually the person who had built the medical center where she had received stitches after falling off her bicycle, her 8-year-old mind had been completely blown. "You mean you're like a superhero, but for hospitals?" she had asked during one of our painting sessions in my apartment. "Something like that," I had replied, touched by her simple but accurate assessment. Michael, at 10, had been more interested in the business aspects. He wanted to know how much money the medical center made, how many people worked there, and whether I had ever fired anyone. His questions showed a natural aptitude for understanding complex systems that reminded me of myself at that age, always watching, always learning, always asking how things really worked. But perhaps the most significant change had been in how I saw myself and presented myself to the world. The woman who had once hidden her accomplishments now spoke openly about her work. The person who had driven a modest car while owning a multi-million-dollar business now drove a vehicle that reflected her actual financial status. The individual who had lived in a small apartment now resided in a beautiful home that honored her achievements without being ostentatious. This wasn't about materialism or showing off. It was about authenticity, about aligning the external presentation of my life with the internal reality of who I was and what I had accomplished. For too long, I had been performing a version of elderly simplicity that bore no relationship to my actual capabilities or resources. That performance had protected me from scrutiny, but had also diminished me in the eyes of people whose respect and understanding mattered most. The changes hadn't been without challenges. Some people in the community were surprised to learn about my role at the medical center, and a few seemed almost resentful that I had kept such a significant secret for so long. There were whispered conversations about why I had chosen to hide my success, speculation about what other secrets I might be keeping, and occasional criticism about the ethics of maintaining such extensive anonymity. But these reactions were vastly outweighed by the support and admiration I received from colleagues, patients, and community members who finally understood the scope of what had been accomplished. Healthcare professionals who had worked with me for years expressed relief that they could finally give credit where it was due. Patients who had benefited from the medical center's excellent care were grateful to learn about the vision and leadership that had made it possible. Most significantly, the revelation had opened up new possibilities for my continued involvement in healthcare innovation. Universities began inviting me to speak about leadership and organizational development. Other medical facilities sought my consultation on operational improvements. Healthcare policy organizations asked for my input on reform initiatives. For the first time in my career, I was being recognized not as someone working behind the scenes, but as a thought leader whose experience and insights could benefit the broader healthcare community. It was both exciting and slightly overwhelming, this transition from invisible influence to acknowledged expertise. As I continued my speech in the auditorium, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment of public recognition and personal authenticity. Excellence in healthcare, I said to the attentive audience, is not just about medical outcomes, though those are certainly important. It's about creating an environment where every person who enters our facility feels valued, respected, and cared for. It's about building systems that support both patients and staff. It's about having the courage to innovate, the wisdom to learn from mistakes, and the persistence to keep improving even when progress seems slow. I paused, looking directly at Sarah, whose eyes were filled with tears of pride and understanding. But most importantly, excellence in healthcare is about understanding that healing happens in relationships. Between doctors and patients, between nurses and families, between all of us who share the common goal of reducing suffering and promoting well-being. These relationships require trust, respect, and the recognition that everyone has something valuable to contribute, regardless of their title or position. The audience erupted in applause, but I could see that my words had landed with particular impact on the healthcare workers in attendance. These were people who understood the daily challenges of providing excellent care, who knew how rare it was to work in an organization that truly supported their efforts to make a difference. After the ceremony, the reception provided an opportunity for more personal conversations with colleagues, friends, and family members. Sarah stayed close to my side throughout the evening, not because she thought I needed protection or assistance, but because she genuinely wanted to hear the conversations I was having with other healthcare leaders. At one point, a young nurse practitioner approached us with obvious nervousness. "Mrs. Whitmore, I just wanted to thank you for creating such an amazing place to work. I graduated from nursing school 2 years ago, and I interviewed at several facilities before choosing Riverside. The difference in culture here is remarkable. People actually care about each other, about the patients, about doing good work." "What makes you say that?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. "It's 100 little things," she replied. "The way senior staff treat new employees, the resources available for continuing education, the fact that patient care always comes before profit margins. You can tell that this place was built by someone who understood what healthcare should be." After she moved on, Sarah looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since she was a child discovering something wonderful. "Mom, do you realize how many people you've influenced, how many careers you've shaped, how many patients you've helped, how many families you've served?" "I've always known the work was important," I replied, "but I never really thought about the cumulative impact until recently." "Why not?" "Because I was so focused on the daily tasks, the immediate problems, the next challenge that needed solving. I didn't step back to see the bigger picture." "And now?" I considered her question carefully. "Now, I understand that the work I've done here will continue long after I'm gone. The culture we've created, the standards we've established, the people we've trained and inspired, they'll carry this forward. That's a kind of legacy I never really considered when I was just trying to do the next right thing. Later that evening, after the reception had ended and the family had gathered at Sarah's house for a late dinner, I found myself in a conversation with my grandson Michael that perfectly captured the transformation that had taken place in our family dynamics. "Grandma Ellie," he said as we sat together on the back porch while the adults finished cleaning up. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Were you always this smart and important? Or did you become that way after Mom stopped, treating you like you were old and confused?" His question was so direct and perceptive that it took me a moment to respond. Children, I reflected, often see truths that adults miss or choose to ignore. I was always the same person, Michael. But sometimes when people treat you a certain way for a long time, you start to forget who you really are. And sometimes when you're modest about your accomplishments, other people assume you don't have any. He nodded thoughtfully. "So Mom wasn't being mean on purpose. She just didn't know the truth about you?" "That's exactly right. And I didn't tell her the truth because I thought it was more important to be humble than to be understood. But that didn't work out very well." "Did it?" I laughed, delighted by his straightforward assessment. "No, it didn't work out very well at all." "Are you going to keep being important now? Or are you going to go back to pretending you're just a regular grandma?" "I'm going to try to be both," I said. "Important in my work, but still you're regular. Grandma who loves spending time with you and Emma." "Good," he said with the satisfied tone of someone who had solved a complex problem. "Because I like having a grandma who builds hospitals, but I also like having a grandma who helps me with my math homework." That conversation stayed with me as I reflected on the changes of the past 6 months. Michael's ability to see both aspects of my identity, to appreciate my professional accomplishments while still valuing our personal relationship, represented exactly what I had been hoping to achieve with the revelation about my role at the medical center. The following Monday, I arrived at the medical center for what had become a new routine. Instead of coming as a patient trying to maintain my anonymity, I came as the acknowledged leader of the organization, ready to engage openly with staff, review operations, and plan for the future. My office on the 3rd floor, which had been maintained but rarely used for several years, was now actively occupied again. Dr. Martinez knocked on my door around 10 o'clock, carrying coffee and wearing the smile of someone who was genuinely happy to see me. "Eleanor, how are you feeling after the big speech on Saturday?" "Energized," I replied honestly, also a little overwhelmed by the response. I had no idea so many people would be interested in hearing about the work we've done here. "Are you kidding? Healthcare administrators across the region have been trying to figure out the secret of Riverside's success for years. Learning that it was your vision and leadership all along has been like solving a mystery everyone's been working on." He settled into the chair across from my desk, a position that had become familiar during our planning sessions over the years. "So what's next? Now that you're operating in the open instead of behind the scenes, what do you want to focus on?" It was a question I had been considering extensively. The revelation of my role had created new opportunities, but also new responsibilities. People were looking to me for leadership not just within the medical center, but in the broader healthcare community. "I think it's time to start sharing what we've learned here," I said. "The patient-centered care model, the staff retention strategies, the operational efficiencies we've developed. If we've figured out how to do healthcare better, we have an obligation to help other facilities improve as well." That sounds like a significant undertaking. It is. But I've got energy and time that I haven't had in years, now that I'm not spending so much effort trying to remain invisible. Dr. Martinez laughed. "I have to ask, do you miss the anonymity at all? The ability to move through the world without people knowing who you are?" I considered his question carefully. There had been a certain freedom in invisibility, a protection from scrutiny and expectation that was sometimes appealing. but it had come at too high a cost. I miss the simplicity of it sometimes, I admitted. But I don't miss being underestimated. I don't miss watching other people get credit for work I had done. And I especially don't miss being treated like I was incompetent by people who should have known better. Including your own family? Especially my own family. That afternoon, Sarah stopped by my office, something that had become a regular occurrence since our reconciliation. She was still working full-time at her law firm, but she had developed a genuine interest in healthcare administration and often sought my advice on complex organizational challenges she was facing in her own work. "Mom, I wanted to run something by you," she said, settling into the chair Dr. Martinez had vacated earlier. "What's on your mind?" "Patterson, Myers & Associates has been asked to handle a legal case involving a hospital's employment practices. The opposing counsel is claiming that the hospital discriminated against older workers by forcing early retirements and limiting advancement opportunities for employees over 60. I leaned forward, intrigued by the intersection of her legal work with issues I cared deeply about. "That's exactly the kind of ageism that affects women in particular," I said. "Older women are often seen as less capable, less innovative, less worthy of investment in their continued development." That's what I thought too, and it made me realize that what happened between us wasn't just a personal family issue. It was a reflection of broader societal attitudes about aging and competence. "Go on." "Well, I was thinking that maybe your experience, your story about building this medical center while being consistently underestimated because of your age and gender, might be relevant to the case. Not as testimony, but as context for understanding how these biases actually play out in the real world." It was a thoughtful connection, and I could see Sarah's legal mind working to understand the broader implications of what we had experienced as a family. "I'd be happy to share my insights," I said. "But more importantly, I'm proud of you for recognizing the patterns and wanting to address them. It's hard to ignore them once you've seen how they affected our own relationship." We spent the next hour discussing the legal case, but also talking about ageism in healthcare, gender bias in leadership, and the ways that assumptions about capability could become self-fulfilling prophecies when people internalized others' low expectations. As Sarah prepared to leave, she paused at the door with an expression of serious consideration. "Mom, can I ask you something personal?" "Always. Do you ever regret the choices you made? Staying quiet about your success, letting people underestimate you, missing out on recognition that you deserved?" It was a question I had asked myself many times over the past 6 months. "I regret the cost of those choices," I said finally. "I regret that our relationship suffered because you didn't understand who I really was. I regret that other women might have benefited from seeing an example of female leadership in healthcare if I had been more public about my role. I regret that I sometimes lost confidence in myself because I spent so much time accommodating other people's assumptions." "But do you regret the choices themselves?" "No," I said after a moment of reflection. "Because those choices led to this moment, to this conversation, to this understanding between us, to this opportunity to move forward with complete honesty about who we are and what we're capable of. I couldn't have planned a better outcome than what we have now." Sarah smiled, the same radiant expression she had worn as a child when everything in her world felt exactly right. "I love you, Mom. The real you. All of you." "I love you too, sweetheart. And I'm grateful that we finally figured out how to see each other clearly." As evening approached and the medical center grew quiet, I remained in my office, working on plans for a healthcare leadership conference that would bring together administrators from across the country to share best practices and innovative approaches. It was the kind of project I never could have undertaken while maintaining my anonymity, but it felt like a natural extension of the work I had been doing for decades. The view from my office window showed the city lights beginning to twinkle as darkness settled over the community I had served for so long. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference, New chances to demonstrate that leadership could come from unexpected places and that excellence was not limited by age, gender, or others' assumptions about capability. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely aligned. The person I was in private matched the person I was in public. The work I did reflected my values and vision without compromise. The relationships I cherished were based on mutual respect and genuine understanding rather than obligation or misperception. I was 72 years old, the owner and founder of one of the region's most respected medical facilities, a woman who had built something extraordinary while remaining largely invisible, and now someone who was ready to step fully into the light of recognition and responsibility. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning. 2 years have passed since that pivotal afternoon in Conference Room A, and as I sit in my beautifully appointed home office this crisp autumn morning, reviewing the final details for next week's National Healthcare Leadership Summit, I find myself reflecting on the profound journey that brought me to this moment. The woman who once allowed her own daughter to lecture her about unnecessary medical expenses in the lobby of her own medical center now serves as the keynote speaker for the most prestigious healthcare conference in the country. The invitation to address over 2,000 healthcare administrators, physicians, and policymakers arrived 6 months ago, accompanied by a letter that still brings tears to my eyes when I read it. Dr. Whitmore, it began, your innovative approach to patient-centered care and your remarkable story of quiet leadership have inspired healthcare professionals across the nation. We would be honored to have you share your insights on transformational leadership, the power of authentic relationships in healthcare, and the importance of recognizing excellence regardless of where it originates. This morning, my speech sits completed on my desk, 25 pages that distill nearly 5 decades of learning, growing, failing, succeeding, and ultimately discovering that the most powerful form of leadership often comes not from those who demand attention, but from those who earn respect through consistent excellence and unwavering commitment to serving others. Sarah will be in the audience next week, along with David and the children. It still amazes me how completely our family dynamic has transformed. Where once there was condescension and concern about my capabilities, there is now genuine admiration and frequent requests for advice. Sarah has become one of my most trusted advisors, her legal expertise complementing my healthcare knowledge as we work together on policy initiatives and organizational development projects. Just last month, she accepted a position as general counsel for a regional hospital system, a career move that was directly inspired by our reconciliation and her newfound understanding of healthcare as a field where law and medicine intersect in fascinating and meaningful ways. When she called to tell me about the job offer, her voice carried the excitement of someone who had discovered a new passion. Mom, I never understood how complex and important healthcare administration really is, she had said. Working with you these past 2 years has opened my eyes to challenges I never knew existed and solutions that require both compassion and business acumen. I want to be part of making healthcare better, the way you've been doing your entire career. The children have adapted to their grandmother's revealed identity with the remarkable resilience of youth. Emma, now 10, has decided she wants to be a doctor, specifically a pediatrician, because she wants to help kids feel better in Grandma Ellie's hospital. She spends hours in my office when she visits, drawing pictures of herself in a white coat, surrounded by smiling patients and state-of-the-art medical equipment. Michael, at 12, has developed a sophisticated understanding of business operations that frankly astonishes me. He asks thoughtful questions about profit margins, staff retention strategies, and the economics of providing charity care. During our last family dinner, he presented a detailed analysis of how the medical center could improve its efficiency by implementing a new patient scheduling system he had researched online. His recommendations were actually quite insightful, and I've asked our IT department to evaluate his suggestions. The medical center itself continues to thrive under the leadership team I've carefully developed over the years. Dr. Martinez has been promoted to Chief Medical Officer, bringing his compassionate approach to patient care and his deep understanding of our organizational culture to a broader leadership role. Patricia now serves as Director of Patient Experience, a position we created specifically to formalize her natural talent for ensuring every person who enters our facility feels valued and cared for. Amanda has completed her degree in healthcare administration and recently accepted a promotion to Assistant Director of Operations. Watching these dedicated professionals grow and take on greater responsibilities fills me with the kind of pride that comes from knowing you've not just built something successful, but something sustainable that will continue to serve the community long after you're gone. The Riverside Medical Center has become a model for other healthcare facilities across the country. We receive dozens of visitors each month, administrators and physicians who want to understand how we've achieved such high patient satisfaction scores while maintaining excellent financial performance. The secret, I tell them, isn't in any single innovation or system, but in the culture we've created where every employee understands that their work contributes to something larger than themselves. 6 months ago, we opened the Eleanor Whitmore Center for Healthcare Innovation, a research and training facility attached to the main medical center. The naming was Sarah's idea, actually, though it took considerable persuasion before I agreed to have my name on the building. For so many years, I had been comfortable with anonymity, that public recognition still felt somewhat foreign. But Sarah had made a compelling argument. Mom, if you don't allow your name to be associated with your achievements, how will future generations of healthcare leaders know that it's possible for someone like you to build something like this? How will young women understand that they can aspire to leadership roles in healthcare administration? Your story matters not just as your personal journey, but as proof of what's possible when vision meets determination. The Innovation Center focuses on developing new approaches to patient care, training the next generation of healthcare leaders, and conducting research on organizational effectiveness in medical settings. Our first class of fellows included 12 healthcare administrators from across the country, each spending 6 months at Riverside learning the systems and approaches that have made us successful. One of those fellows, Dr. Maria Rodriguez, reminded me so much of myself at her age that I found myself serving as her personal mentor. She had the same hunger for learning, the same attention to detail, and the same intuitive understanding of how to build relationships that make complex organizations function effectively. When her fellowship ended, she accepted a position as Chief Operating Officer at a struggling hospital in Texas, armed with the knowledge and confidence to implement transformational changes. 3 months later, she called to report that patient satisfaction scores at her facility had improved by 40%, staff turnover had dropped to its lowest level in 5 years, and they were ahead of budget for the first time in recent memory. Dr. Whitmore, she said, everything I learned at Riverside is working here. But more than the specific systems and processes, what you taught me was to trust my instincts and never underestimate the power of treating every person with dignity and respect. Those are the moments that make every challenge, every long day, every difficult decision feel worthwhile. Knowing that the work we've done here is being replicated and adapted in other communities, touching the lives of patients and families I'll never meet, creates a sense of purpose that extends far beyond the walls of our own facility. The transformation in my personal life has been equally profound. I moved out of my modest apartment and into a beautiful home that properly reflects both my personal taste and my financial means. It's not ostentatious, but it's comfortable and elegant, with space for entertaining colleagues and family, a proper office for my growing consulting work, and a studio where I can continue painting, a hobby that has become increasingly important as I've grown older. The house also has a guest suite that Sarah and her family use regularly, and where my colleagues from around the country stay when they visit for conferences or training sessions. Having space to host others has opened up new possibilities for both professional collaboration and personal relationships that I cherish deeply. I've also made peace with the financial aspects of my success. For years, I lived well below my means, partly from habit and partly from a sense that visible wealth might somehow diminish the value of my work. But I've come to understand that financial security, properly managed, enhances my ability to serve others. The charitable foundation I established now provides millions of dollars annually in free medical care, medical research funding, and scholarships for healthcare workers pursuing advanced education. The foundation's work extends beyond our immediate community. We've funded mobile medical clinics that serve rural areas without adequate healthcare access, provided grants for innovative research projects at major medical schools, and supported international healthcare initiatives in developing countries. Each project is carefully evaluated to ensure it aligns with our mission of improving healthcare access and quality for underserved populations. Perhaps most importantly, I've discovered the joy of mentorship on a broader scale. Through speaking, engagements, consulting work, and the Innovation Center, I've had the opportunity to work with hundreds of healthcare professionals at various stages of their careers. Many are women who face the same challenges I encountered decades ago, struggling to be taken seriously in leadership roles, fighting for recognition of their contributions, and working to balance professional ambition with personal relationships. To these women, I offer not just practical advice about healthcare administration, but encouragement to trust their instincts, demand the respect they deserve, and never allow others' assumptions about their capabilities to limit their aspirations. I share my story not as a cautionary tale about the dangers of modesty, but as proof that excellence and authenticity can coexist, that it's possible to be both successful and compassionate, both ambitious and humble. The speaking circuit has introduced me to remarkable individuals across the healthcare industry, many of whom have become close friends and collaborators. Dr. Janet Liu, who transformed a failing hospital system in California, now serves on our Foundation's Board of Directors. Robert Martinez, no relation to our Dr. Martinez, built a network of community health centers in underserved urban areas and frequently consults with us on expansion strategies. These relationships have enriched my life immeasurably and reminded me that excellent healthcare leadership exists in many forms across many different settings. What we share is a commitment to putting patients first, a dedication to continuous improvement, and an understanding that healthcare is ultimately about human relationships built on trust, competence, and compassion. As I prepare for next week's keynote address, I've been thinking about the themes I want to emphasize. Certainly, I'll discuss the operational and strategic approaches that have made Riverside successful. But more importantly, I want to talk about the power of authentic leadership, the importance of creating organizational cultures where everyone's contributions are valued, and the reality that the most effective leaders are often those who focus more on serving others than on promoting themselves. I also want to address the particular challenges faced by women in healthcare leadership and the ways that age-related bias can diminish the contributions of experienced professionals. My story is not unique in its broad outlines. Many women have built successful careers while remaining largely invisible. Many older workers have been dismissed or underestimated because of assumptions about their capabilities. And many leaders have chosen humility over self-promotion, only to find that their modesty was mistaken for inadequacy. The difference is that I had the opportunity to correct these misperceptions, to reclaim my narrative, and to demonstrate that quiet leadership can be just as powerful as more visible forms. Not everyone gets that chance, and I feel a responsibility to use my platform to advocate for recognition of excellence wherever it exists, regardless of whether it comes with fanfare or operates behind the scenes. The speech will also touch on the future of healthcare, the challenges and opportunities that will define the next generation of medical practice, and the kinds of leadership that will be needed to navigate an increasingly complex environment. Healthcare faces unprecedented challenges: aging populations, technological disruption, financial pressures, and growing expectations for personalized, convenient, high-quality care. Meeting these challenges will require leaders who can think systemically, adapt quickly, and maintain focus on the human elements that make healthcare meaningful. It will require people who understand that innovation isn't just about new technologies or treatment protocols, but about finding better ways to organize care, support patients and families, and create environments where medical professionals can do their best work. As I put the finishing touches on my remarks, I'm struck by how far I've traveled from that morning 2 years ago when Sarah made me cancel my doctor's appointment. The woman who was lectured about unnecessary medical expenses now advises hospital systems across the country on operational efficiency and financial management. The person who was treated like a burden now serves as a resource for hundreds of healthcare professionals seeking to improve their organizations. But perhaps the most meaningful change is in my relationship with my family. Sarah and I talk regularly, not just about family matters, but about professional challenges and opportunities that interest us both. She seeks my advice on complex legal cases involving healthcare organizations, and I value her perspective on the policy and regulatory issues that affect medical practice. David has become genuinely interested in healthcare facility design and has collaborated with us on several building projects that incorporate both architectural excellence and operational efficiency. His professional expertise combined with my understanding of healthcare workflows has resulted in some innovative design solutions that are being studied by other medical facilities. The grandchildren remain a source of pure joy, but now our relationships include shared interest in my work and their growing understanding of the impact that thoughtful healthcare leadership can have on entire communities. They're proud of their grandmother's achievements, but they also know me as someone who listens to their concerns, helps with their homework, and never misses an important event in their lives. This integration of personal and professional identity, this alignment between who I am in private and who I am in public, represents perhaps the most valuable outcome of the journey I've taken. For too many years, I compartmentalized my life in ways that ultimately diminished both my professional effectiveness and my personal relationships. Now, at 74, I feel more authentic, more purposeful, and more energized than I have in decades. The work continues to evolve and expand. New challenges and opportunities present themselves regularly, and I wake each morning with genuine excitement about the day ahead. The medical center remains the foundation of everything I do, but it's no longer the boundary of my influence or impact. Through consulting, speaking, writing, and mentoring, I've been able to touch hundreds of healthcare organizations and thousands of healthcare professionals. The ripple effects of this work extend far beyond what I can measure or even imagine. Next week's keynote address represents not an ending, but a new beginning. Another opportunity to share what I've learned and to encourage others to pursue excellence in healthcare leadership. The title of my speech is The Power of Quiet Leadership: How Authentic Service Creates Lasting Impact, and I believe it captures the essence of what I've learned about building something meaningful while remaining true to your values and committed to serving others. As I close my laptop and prepare for the day ahead, I'm filled with gratitude for the journey that brought me to this place. The challenges were real, the misunderstandings were painful, and the years of invisibility came at a significant cost. But they also taught me lessons about resilience, authenticity, and the importance of staying true to your purpose even when others don't understand or appreciate your contributions. The woman who owns and built the Riverside Medical Center is the same woman who was once dismissed as a confused elderly patient. The difference isn't in my capabilities or achievements, but in my willingness to claim them, to stand up for my worth, and to demand the respect that my work has earned. That transformation continues every day, in every interaction, in every decision to speak up rather than remain silent, to take credit rather than deflect praise, and to live authentically rather than according to others' expectations. It's a lesson I hope to continue sharing, and a legacy I'm proud to leave for future generations of healthcare leaders who will carry this work forward long after I'm gone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.